before we start making the setting, we need to work out what length to make the silver before we form it into the setting. And to do that, we need the diameter of the stone and add the thickness of the material we're using. And we've got some silver here that's 1mm thick. So anything around about 1 to 1.1mm is fine for this. So the diameter being 6mm, add the thickness, that makes it 7, and times that by pi, and that will give you 21.98. So we'll call it 22. So we need to make sure that the sheet of silver has a 22 at least mil side to it. So yes, this one does. What I'm going to do is just file the edge perfectly straight and make sure that the end is square. So use your set square. You can see that that's square on the end there. So that's ready to go. And now you need to determine now what height the setting is going to be. So for this one, I'm going to have the setting height at 5.5mm total when it's finished. So I've set my dividers to 5.5mm. I know that doesn't give me any file up room later, but the setting will grow a fraction as it's being formed into the collet block. It moves around a bit, so we will have some height to remove from the bottom of the setting later on. So now I'll just scribe a line across the bottom there and just mark off 22mm. It's almost at that now anyway. So, and the good thing about once you get some practice using your collet block, the measurements aren't critical because you can actually enlarge the setting and decrease the size if you need to. So it's always good to work with the measurements to start with and get it right that way first, and then once you get used to using your collet block and you've made a few settings, you'll see that you can be pretty creative with it. So cut outside the line. Square off the other end. And just tidy up this edge again. And now if you've not already done so, anneal it. I use a neutral flame to anneal the silver, and this means that there's less chance of fire scale coming to the surface. So take it up to cherry red and then allow it to cool till all that redness is gone, and then you can quench and pickle it. Before we form the setting, just run your file over both ends, and that just cleans it ready for soldering later on. And use a good sturdy pair of round nose pliers and grip the very end like so. And now just push the metal around and try and avoid twisting your pliers, so you should let your left hand do the work. So again, clamp the other end like so, try and get it as close to the end as possible, otherwise you'll have a straight bit on the end there. Push it around again, and if you're finding it difficult, silver's quite soft, but if you're using 9 or 10 karat gold, you'll find it a bit tougher. So you can use the side of the bench peg like that and just squeeze the ends together as close as you can get. So do as much work by hand like that at this stage, and you'll find that the setting is a little bit big, but we need to close this joint up properly now. So over to the collet block. Now, one of the common mistakes to make for a jeweller is to start using the collet punch too early on. The first thing you need to do is close the joint up. Once that's done and it's soldered, then the punch comes into play. So find a hole that the setting fits into, and with a good firm hammer, so this one's got quite a large face on it, it's really good for doing work like this, just give it a clout. And you'll see it's tightened up already there. a little bit open there, so we're just going to turn it upside down and again get it together. So what we want is a really tight joint before we solder it, so the solder isn't filling any gaps. I'm going to take this back over to my bench peg and run my blade through that, just to make sure that when it meets tightly it's going to be perfectly parallel and meet up without any gaps at all. That's how mine's looking at the moment. You can see it's not a perfect joint. So with my saw blade, this is a 4/0 saw blade, so anything around 4/0 or 5/0 is fine to do this. And just run your blade through. A 2/0 will open the gap up too much. So all the way through. And there you go. So that's also cleaned it as well. So I need to go back to the collet block and tighten that up again. Now you see how forceful I am with this, so don't be too soft when it comes to working on collets, and even when it's not been soldered we need to make the metal move and get it together, so good feel not like that, and you'll see that the joint is tightened right up at the bottom where it's going into the collet block, and here it's just a fraction open there. I don't really want to solder it until the gap is totally closed, so I forced it in the same direction again. It's only open a fraction there, so I'm going to turn it upside down and give it a tap that way. Don't worry about the size of it. We can make the adjustments once we've soldered it. So I just want to show you now that that joint is super tight. So the solder's going to do no gap filling and it will be invisible when it's all cleaned up. If you're familiar with my training, then you know that I use Tenacity for a flux paste. It's very convenient, but a traditional flux is the borax cone and dish with a little bit of water and a little bit of action like that. You can make a beautiful flux paste, and this is how I started with my training. Now this is all we ever used. A little bit messy, and they do recommend that you use distilled water, but it really doesn't make too much difference. So I'm going to stick with the borax cone and dish and pick up some flux that way. I might start using this a bit more. So traditional, not overly convenient, but it's also a safer option. I found this out because one of my students was concerned being pregnant, didn't know what the health hazards were with soldering, and after a bit of research it turns out that the flux paste that I've been using and recommending, it's not always a good idea to use that if you are pregnant. So I assure you I'm not, and that's not the reason I'm using the borax cone and dish, but nonetheless I think I'm going to start using it a bit more now. So I've got my little palon of hard solder resting right on the joint, flux both the solder and the joint, making sure it goes around and through the other side as well, and hard solder, as I say. I'm going to use a more oxidizing flame now so that I can direct the heat if need be. So if you don't direct the heat properly, then and you favour one side of the joint and not the other, then the solder will just jump on the one side and not go along the joint. So now it's started to melt into the joint, so just pull the flame back and just make sure that it runs all the way down. I've got some standby bits of solder there if I need it, and it doesn't look as though I do because the joint is so tight. So I'll turn it over so I can see the inside of the setting, and I need to make sure, yeah, I can see the solder line on the inside now, so I'm not sure if you're getting a view of that, but you need to ensure that the solder has gone right the way through, and it's a little bit lumpy on the top there. I'll just allow that to melt a bit more. It doesn't matter, we can just file that off, but you want to file it off before you start forming it in the block, otherwise it becomes part of the of the silver, and it'll be noticed when you clean it up later. So now once that's lost its redness, I'll quench and pickle. So as I mentioned, just get rid of any excess solder. So now we can have a look at the collet block and see which hole is going to best suit our stone. So I'm putting the stone over that one there, and I think that's where it's going to end up. As you can see, I'll have enough metal around the stone for setting. So you can see if I force it in there, we're going to have a big flange of silver that will fold over the edge there, and we're just going to lose metal that way. So we're going to carry on forcing it into the same one that we did before. Incident. I'll just see how we're going there. It doesn't look too bad, it's just you can see it's folded in there, so I'm pretty sure once we go in that one we're going to be fine. But to avoid that flange of metal, I'm going to just turn it upside down in the same one and give it a good firm whack, and then we can have some fun there, just whacking away till it gets level with the top of the block. Protect your ears if you have sensitive hearing. Well, there you go, it looks a little bit munted as you can see, but now it's time to use the collet punch. So make sure that you strike the punch dead square. So when I say that, it's got to be square this way, and when I turn the block, it's got to be square that way. And if you don't get it right, then your setting is going to have one thick wall on one side and a thin wall on the other side, so it has to be perfectly square. And a good few firm knocks. And now you can work on getting the thickness you want, so we can make it thinner, because that setting wall is 1 mil is definitely enough. If you did have 1.2, it would be way too thick. So you can see, look, the setting is pretty much done as is now, so it's just a matter of fiddling about and getting the right thickness. So I'm going to give it a few more whacks. I'll anneal it first, and then it'll move a lot easier. I'll just put the stone on top, just see how it looks, and it's not too bad. Ideally, a stone should sit halfway into the thickness, or even a fraction less, but certainly no more. If it's any more than halfway into the thickness, as in the girdle of the stone is close to the edge, then when it comes to cutting the seat, you could break through the wall of the setting. So make sure it's no more than halfway. A few good whacks. And what you need to be aware of is that this block is perfectly engineered, which means that the angle of the top of the setting and the angle of the inside of the hole is going to impress perfectly onto your setting, which means that as long as your setting is flat on that face there, then you don't have to worry about any trimming on the top of the setting and the walls. The only area you need to work on, as you can see, it's a little bit out of shape, is the bottom of the setting. So make sure you don't hit it with a file and try and change angles once it's been formed in the collet block, because you'll just be chasing your tail. So that's pretty much it. I've got a little bit of a lip there that I'm just going to file off, because I just wanted a bit more I wanted the setting a bit more open for the stone, so that's why when I put it onto the collet block like that, when I turn it, you can see there's about a ½ mil difference, but at least it is level, so I know that I don't need to file that flat. So over to my bench peg, I'll just finish off the filing. Make sure as well at this stage that you've got a shine going on all the way around, so the punch has made contact with the silver on the inside all the way around, and on the outside of the setting it's got that silvery shine to it, so it has made contact perfectly with the block. Okay, so you can see that little lip that's that's there, a little ridge there. So I'm not going to file it down, as I said. I'll just take it off this way. And it really is as simple as that. So when I'm teaching students, generally takes, I'd say 3 goes before they get it right. And once you get it right, it's so easy. It's where you start for forming claw settings as well. So what I recommend you do is get yourself some copper or brass and have a practice, do a few of them. And when you've got it right, then move on to silver. Learn how to make bezels like this, and then it's a nice easy step to start doing claw settings then. So making real jewellery. So let's see how the stone is. So there we go. It's it perhaps does need to come down a fraction, but as it is now, I can work with that. Once it's in the ring, I can just drop the height of it a little bit. And as you can see, the bottom of it just needs a bit of an adjustment. Now, I've not altered my divider setting, so that's still at 5.5 mil. So you can see now that I've got a good 1.5 mil to take off the bottom. But it does give me an option of having a taller setting. So bear that in mind. You can take that off, but you can't put it back on again. So use your dividers to mark off the bottom of the setting, knowing that the top is perfectly angled to the walls. So I just need to shave off that much for the height that I want. And when I'm working my pliers like this, I'm not putting much pressure on the silver because it'll just dent it. So I'll minimise tool marks, keeping a good eye on the scribe line I've just done, and I'll just stop a fraction short. I just want to show you if you do need to squeeze the setting down a fraction. So I've just got the stone on the inside edge of the setting there, so just a fraction too big. So what I can do is squeeze it down by putting it upside down in the hole next to the final one that it goes into, and make sure it's perfectly level, and give it a little tap like so. Now if it leans off when you do that, it could deform the settings, so just be very careful. Make sure it is perfectly straight like that, and a good firm clout, nice and straight, and you'll see that the setting has just turned itself in a fraction, and enough to set the stone in nicely. And also it's always good with a bezel setting, I find, to just turn up the wall a fraction just towards the top, so it just slightly changes the angle, so when you're setting the stone, that angle continues to go over the stone. So that's done now, and it's ready to be formed into a nice piece of jewellery. It's as easy as that.